Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on Something Social. My name is Chris Gonzalez. I'm going to be your host this morning and this afternoon here. We're joined by Mr. Troy Norcross. Troy brings over 20 years experience in digital advertising, consulting, and strategy for companies. He's currently working as working with SER Associates, providing digital strategies and innovation consulting, and really focusing hard on this one-year program as they're supporting Europe and a lot of the UK on this transformation into the digital media space with his Metamorphosis conference. We're really excited to have Troy in the studio today. Troy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here.
You know, you're having incredible skills and backgrounds. It's such a wide scope, but I want to really narrow some in on really what you're working on right now. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, kind of tell us how you got started in the digital marketing space, how you got started in innovation, and how that kind of led up to what you're doing right now with SER.
So it's an interesting story in so much as with innovation, big piece of that is bringing a variety of experiences to bear. So I'm going to give kind of a very abbreviated history. I started off on 4,000 acres of farmland and 1,000 head of beef cattle in Missouri as a farmer, okay?
Wow.
But allergic to every single thing on the farm. I mean, runny nose, watery eyes, breakout in hives, the whole 9 yards. And at 12 years old, I went to the local university and walked into a computer room. It was raised floor, it was bright lights, and it was clean air. And I said, computers, this is my future. My ticket off the farm. And so I took all my education, went straight into computer science, and my first actual job was in St. Louis. I was doing flight simulators for military aircraft for McDonnell Douglas, and that was my first kind of job out. I then worked for Silicon Graphics, high-end 3D graphics company. I was one of the few people that did Unix and Unix systems administration in Indiana. So I was the Unix guy, and I actually owned the domain name unixguy.net because I was the Unix guy in Indiana. I could actually fix computers that were based on Unix. I then moved to the Valley and got into telecoms, worked for a big infrastructure company called Open Wave Systems, and they brought me to Amsterdam, and I lived in Europe for a year and got bitten by the whole European bug. I mean, over the course of my life, I've lived in Amsterdam, in Munich, in Zurich, in Helsinki, and for the last 12 years, I've lived here in London. So I've got a real wide variety of experiences. But then 2 years ago, I got invited to work for a big digital agency called Digitas LBI. Their client was AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca needed to have new products and services in pharma to help heart attack patients take their medications. So suddenly, I'm thrust in the middle of this innovation service for big pharma, way out of my comfort zone on lots of different areas.
That's awesome.
So I know a lot more about clinical psychology and pharmacology and the FDA compliance and all the rest than I ever wanted to. But it was the variety of experiences that I've had in running startups, in working in big corporates, in working in programming and technology, working in marketing and services and strategy that allowed me to kind of pull all of those things together and begin doing innovation. Now, I've always done kind of digital marketing and those kinds of things, digital advertising, consumer data, consumer privacy. Even when I was at Nokia, we were running the Nokia Media Network. And we were running Nokia Offers, which was a mobile couponing platform. So I've had a lot of experiences in those areas. And now I'm working for SER Associates, where we say strategy is good, execution is better, but results are best, SER. And that's what we're focusing on. And so that's kind of how I got where I am today.
Wow. What an incredible journey. And I like the aspect that you've been able to bring these American perspectives, having sort of started there and sort of hopped the pond. You're in Europe now and sort of getting exposed to that end and really making sort of a comprehensive viewpoint of, because I mean, I now as, you know, social media and the internet's really grown and global connectivity, you know, now I feel that that's more relevant more than ever.
Yeah, I always say I speak American, but I'm still learning to speak English.
That's awesome. I have to ask you, what's been like one of your favorite countries to do business in, and like where, or is, like, you know, what is it all kind of mixed in? I mean, what is it like really doing business in the UK and in the Western Europe?
So each individual country, and sometimes even within the countries, there are lots of really great, amazing cultures, and they're all slightly different. You just got to really understand the difference of culture and how to understand the French, especially in Paris. They love to argue. So if you don't argue with them, then you're not doing it right. The Dutch will tell you exactly where it is, and there's just no tact about it at all. It just, there it is, and they don't even recognize that it might be kind of, slightly offensive. In Finland, until you add vodka and put somebody in a sauna, they really don't say much at all. So at the end of a meeting, you can't tell, did I have a good result? Did I have a bad result? Am I going to get a sale? Did I lose it? You have no idea. So
Oh
what do
my
I love about doing business in Western Europe? It's the variety. It's culture, it's language, it's everything. But at the end of the day, people still buy from people. And that's true regardless.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That's great advice, because I mean, I think that's, as we get a lot of, we do tend to get disconnected with a lot of analytics and a lot of metrics that can dehumanize the elements. And especially on social media, we are all humans behind the keyboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more personal than ever with Instagram and, with Snapchat, which, more and more, those are the two bigs, kings and queens of social media and where things are going, where people are paying attention.
Yeah, and I'm really interested. What's been the overall viewpoints of Instagram and Snapchat specifically in the UK and over Europe, since you kind of have an ear on the ground there? Like, I've seen influencer marketing growing. I've seen use of paid sponsored social in those countries growing. I think Germany just had their first influencer marketing conference last year. I mean, what's the interest been on social media? Is there a particular platform you see that they gravitate to, or is it sort of a pretty big net, pretty big scope?
It's pretty big scope. You got to recognize that in Europe, people are generally more risk averse. They're really, really afraid of failure. And so they take much more measured approaches into how they do things. So you're finding more and more experimentation. There's not a whole lot of buy-in to one particular platform or program. And they're going to let the people in the US kind of de-risk things, stub their toe a few times, and then they'll be fast followers more than they're going to be leaders. I'm personally very keen on Periscope and Meerkat and trying to figure out how people are going to use that. I mean, you're doing a live video chat on Google Hangouts, so that's adding video. We're seeing that in the next 5 years, 80% of all mobile data traffic will be video. So Is it going to be a live video? Is it going to be sponsored video? What kind of video is it going to be? And so there's a huge pull towards anything that's video, short form video, snackable video.
Vertical video.
The other thing that the US has a huge commuting culture. Okay. So there are huge blocks of time when people have nothing to do but listen to a podcast, watch a quick video, do something like that. In Western Europe, there's not those hour-and-a-half or hour-long commutes where people have that much time in the car. The majority of people are working closer to their homes, or they're taking public transport where they may not have access to. Like London, if you're underground, you've got no internet except at the stations. There are a number of different nuances to all of this commute time and content consumption during commuting. I mean, in the underground, everything is books. All of the advertisements on the underground are books that you can buy so you can read on the underground.
Wow, interesting. I wonder what put some Wi-Fi antennas in there and be good to go.
Well, they've got Wi-Fi, but only when you're in the station. So you get Wi-Fi for 2 minutes, every time the train comes into a station, and then it's gone again.
That's funny. That's interesting. That's really interesting. And I think those are some variables that marketers and advertisers should account for culturally when they look into moving into new spaces. I mean, that's something I would never even thought of from an advertising perspective, as the mode of transportation affects the consumption of the media.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely, it does.
So, I mean, we talked a little bit and you alluded to some of these trends that are happening in mobile, and I know you're working a lot in ad blocking, and we've seen a lot of ad blocking really take hold towards the end of last year. And I know one of the things you're doing with your Metamorphosis conference is this conference about getting people equipped to handle what's coming, and more importantly, providing some follow-up elements to this. I mean, can you kind of take us through as some of these trends that you spotted and how that kind of led to creating your conference, and then what your conference is about and what you hope to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of tell you about it because I'm very, very psyched about it. 4 years ago, there was an EU privacy directive that turned into something they called in the news the cookie law, because it was all about cookies, and that was something that people could get their heads around. Now, at the end of the day, it wasn't about cookies at all. It was about consumer data and privacy, and cookies were simply the anchors to hold it all together. And now you see lots of pop-ups. Do you accept cookies? Yes or no? And that's the kind of thing that was kind of the extent of when it happened. And if you don't do anything, there's an implied consent. Yeah, you've given your consent, so we're going to go ahead and do what we were going to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, about last year, there's a new EU regulation. So it's not a directive, it's a regulation, which means it's more uniform across the whole of the EU. And it's actually a law that actually has to be implemented. So it's not down to country by country to do whatever they decide they want to do. And it's called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. It'll become in force in 2018. And they say you must have unambiguous, meaning you can't just imply that you got consent from somebody, consent to actually build a profile and collect information about them. So that was a pretty big step, and it's coming. 2018 is going to be here before we know it. Ad blocking's been trundling along in the background for a long time. All the techies kind of knew what it was, and nobody else really cared much about it until October, when Apple came out with iOS 9, and content blocking suddenly made ad blocking available on mobile. And the consumer said, wait a minute, if I can do ad blocking on my mobile phone, can I also do it on my desktop? And there was this hockey stick effect in ad blocking and the awareness of ad blocking.
Right, because they have been on desktops for a while.
Yeah, it's been on desktops for a long time, but it's not been going anywhere. I mean, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I've written a couple of articles that say, okay, publishers, when are you going to wake up and do something about this? Because it's gonna bite you. But the numbers were so small, they didn't really care. Now, up to 35% of revenue is being lost due to ad blocking. It's got people's attention. And so we say, you know, what Napster did to digital music, AdBlock Plus is going to be doing to digital media. And it's a big parallel, and it gets people's attention, and they know what it means. And as an industry, we're going to be disrupted. Do we want to let the disruption happen to us, or do we want to engage and participate and be part of defining what the disrupted industry looks like? And when I say disruption, I mean in business models, changing engagements with consumers. Because some people will say that, you know, ad blocking is unethical and it's illegal and it's theft and it's all this. And I'm like, okay, fine, that's one perspective. The consumer's perspective says, look, I'm more than happy to have some content, and I'll look at some ads and I'll give you some of my attention, but there's got to be a fair value exchange. And when it's not a fair value exchange, the consumer is going to be kind of like, okay, you've crossed the line. And I really think advertisers said, oh, well, we need better ads. We'll do them more quietly. We'll push them out of the way. We won't interrupt the content. It's all our fault. And I'm like, not really buying that one. Advertisers can do all that, but basically that means they're easier to ignore. Well, ads are already easy to ignore. So better ads, easier to ignore, that doesn't work. And they're like, no. We mean more relevant ads. Oh, that's good, except you got this new EU privacy regulation coming around the corner that says you're going to have less data, so they're going to be less relevant ads. Okay, so got that problem. And then publishers are the ones that simply said, I've got to make money for my content. It costs money to run the servers and to write the content and to curate it. And I'm not making any money from subscriptions because nobody will pay for my content. So I'm going to add more and more and more and more and more ads until I get enough money to pay for my content. And finally, consumers said, no more ads, but I'll still have your content. Thank you very much. So all of these things, I said, I need to do something. This is an opportunity. The time is now to bring advertisers and publishers and consumer privacy specialists all in the same room. And we're going to talk about what it means. How did we get here? We're going to talk about how is it impacting your business? And we're going to start looking at solutions that are coming down the line. And I'll have 3 different startups that'll be with me showing what they're doing to help either sell consumers data, that the consumer has control of the sale of the data, or other forms of monetizing the content, or other forms of reaching consumers in a different way for advertisers. So trying to get out of the box.
Mm. And one element I think was extremely very refreshing to hear in this conference setup was not only were you going to have a dialogue about these problems and kind of brainstorm about the causes and sort of where we're heading and these trends, but there's this component where we're actually going to have, you're going to be offering these startups that are offering solutions to these issues. And so not only are you talking about the problem, we're talking about solutions as well.
Right. So Metamorphosis, A Balanced Future for Media is the name of the conference. And Metamorphosis is about change and transformation. So we're going to take all of the outputs from this conference and we're going to give them to another organization called Chrysalis One. And Chrysalis One is a group of individuals and teams and startups that will work together to solve the problems that we identify during the conference. So this is not one of those conferences we tell you a bunch of stuff and you go away. This is a conference where we actually have outputs and we hand them over to Chrysalis One. And chrysalis is the name of the cocoon for a monarch butterfly. So it's inside the chrysalis that all the transformation changes. And sometimes we take little ugly startup caterpillars and we turn them into beautiful monarch butterflies on the other end and help them along the way. So that in October, we'll have a one-day conference and we'll have a whole series of monarch solutions to industry-wide problems. And so this becomes a one-year program of transformation within the industry and solution focus.
Wow, that's incredible. And we have a lot of publishers that watch the show, and there's a lot of people that are out there doing online publishing. What solutions do you kind of have for them off the top of the bat? Is it this BuzzFeed model of native advertising, where we're going to create advertisements that look like other content and kind of mixing it in with your normal publishing mix as a way to kind of navigate these ad blockers? I know you've been working with some technology on some those startups that for Metamorphosis and what you're kind of alluding to earlier. What are some main strategies have you seen work really well to navigate this ad blocking?
So native advertising and sponsored content and branded content is indeed where a lot of people are starting to go. It's fairly costly to do, and you got to have the right budget and you got to have the right focus to do it. But the other side of all of that, in the UK, there's the Advertising Standards Association, the ASA. And you've got to be clear to the consumer, this is indeed branded sponsored content versus this is journalistic content. And it's being clear about those two lines. And so the ASA is really paying very close attention right now, because you don't want to mislead or defraud the customer at the end of the day.
And to clarify, ASA is in Europe, right?
ASA is in the UK.
Okay.
Up until 3 years ago in the UK, you could not have product placement, so on television. So you couldn't have the can of Coke sitting in front of Simon Cowell.
Wow.
So they had them actually get blurred out when they would import those into the UK. They've now moved that on, but you have to declare that you've got product placement going on. And of course, there's been lots of product placement in the Bond movies, from watches to cars and all the rest. So there's definitely a movement in that direction. Another one coming out of MIT is called Tipsy. And Tipsy is a browser plugin. And it knows when you've got AdBlock turned on, but it also knows all the sites that you went to. At the end of the month, it pops up and says, put some money in the tip jar, put $10 in, put whatever you want in, and we will distribute that money based on the number of minutes that you spent on each of those individual sites. So it's a tip jar sort of approach that you get to put money in, and it handles all of the distribution.
And how's that panned out?
I think they're trying it. I think that you got to get a lot of people to sign up to do that on the publisher side to make that really worthwhile and make it work well. The second bit is time doesn't equal value. 5 minutes on BuzzFeed versus 5 minutes on the Financial Times, I'm not sure that those are equal in value.
That's funny.
You got to watch that one fairly closely. The ex-CEO of Mozilla just came out with a new browser called Brave. And Brave is going to be hopefully sitting in the middle between the consumer and the publisher, and they're bringing in their own good advertising, as they say. And they're going to share the revenue with the publisher, and they're going to share some of the revenue back with the consumer. It's an interesting model, but at the end of the day, Brave is actually making money from content that they don't own. So there's all kinds of licensing issues that'll come up in the middle of all that. And so I'm not sure what the best solution is going to be. I think there are, GQ is doing micropayments. It's 25 cents to read an article on GQ. People like Forbes are basically saying, if you've got an ad blocker, we're going to block your access to our site.
Exactly. Yeah.
That lasted for about 2 weeks before they found a way to get around that. So this is the whole thing about the people who manufacture the radar guns for the cops are the same ones who manufacture the radar detectors that they sell to the consumers. And there's this kind of
technological arms race.
It's an arms race, in ad block, anti-ad block, more anti-ad block, and there's an arms race kind of going on, exactly. So that's kind of going on.
So we got about 5 minutes here. I want you to give me a condensed answer, but long story short, how did we get here? I mean, I know consumers know there has to be advertising to consume free content because there's a cost associated with it. I think I saw a stat that said 88% of people know when they're reading free published content, it took advertising revenue to get that to them. Otherwise, the writers aren't getting paid to write the content that you love. I mean, but given that as a context, I mean, how did we even get here? I mean, what really led to this uptick of ad blocking, short of Apple really allowing that to go on their devices and into the mobile marketplace? But I mean, was there something greater at play here?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, the publisher was getting less and less revenue. Ad revenues were falling, and as a result, they got more and more aggressive with their advertising. And consumers were it was all pent up demand. And as soon as consumers had a choice and had an option to do something, they started doing something about it. So this has been kind of an abuse of the relationship between the publisher and the consumer. Not all publishers at all, but some of them are just, they're just desperate to make as much revenue as they can. And I think that finally built up demand in the consumer. Suddenly they had a tool to do something about it. And then they're getting privacy regulations in the UK and in the EU to do even more things about it. So we talk about a shift of power. The power used to be with the advertiser and the publisher. Now it's going to the consumer. The shoe's on the other foot.
There you have it. Wow. Troy Norcross, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat digital marketing, ad blockers, learn more about what you're doing with your Metamorphosis conference. I want everyone to go check out metamorphosis-conference.com.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a really, really great time.
All right, it's been a pleasure, Troy. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.